Let's give another round of applause to Ravi for that rousing period. At this time, I will invite my colleague, Dr. Alan Perry, to introduce the panelists.
Hotep, peace. Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce, after this brilliant speech, thank you so very much. I'd like to introduce you all to our distinguished panelists. And I'd like to start by Mr. Eric Brown. Mr. Eric Brown is a political blogger and radio talk show host who works full-time as a human resources representative for employee and labor relations at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. He's a graduate of Eastern Michigan University with a degree in health administration, a past president of the EMU Alumni Association, a member of the African American Studies Advisory Board, and charter member of the board for the International Academy of Livonia, opening fall 2013. Mrs. Brown is a political blogger for Detroit News and the radio talk show host of Reality Strikes, which made its debut on Cats Radio last January the 20th. He's a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity, Incorporated, secretary of Detroit Kappa Foundation, and staunch believer in voting for the person, not for the party. We also have Dr. Barbara Patrick, who is an assistant professor of political science. Previously, Dr. Patrick was an assistant professor of political science and public administration at Mississippi State University. She received both a Doctor of Philosophy and Master's degree in Public Policy and Administration from Mississippi State University, with such areas of concentration as research methodology, public budgeting, and financial management. Dr. Patrick received a bachelor's degree in political science from West College in Holly Springs, Mississippi. We have Dr. Gregg Barak. Those of you who have been here also have seen Dr. Barak consistently sharing his thoughts with us. Dr. Barak is professor of criminology and criminal justice at Eastern Michigan University and the former visiting distinguished professor in College of Justice and Safety at Eastern Kentucky University. In 2003, he became the 27th Fellow of the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences and received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Critical Division of the American Society of Criminology in 2007. Dr. Barak was also the last Eastern Michigan University recipient of the Ronald Collins Distinguished Faculty Award for both scholarly and creative activity, awarded in 2006. Dr. Barak is author and editor of numerous books on crime, justice, media violence, criminal law, homelessness, human rights, and related topics. Among his latest books are the co-authored Class, Race, Gender, and Crime, The Social Realities of Justice in America, which is in its third edition, if I'm not mistaken. Also, Criminology, an integrated approach, and the forthcoming Theft of a Nation, Wall Street Looting, and Federal Regulatory Colluding. Dr. Barak is also the series editor for Issues and Crime in Crime and Justice, published by both Rowman and Littlefield Publishers and Lexington Books. John Engwenyu is an instructor of history at Eastern Michigan University. He teaches a variety of courses related to African history, and he has been with us for a number of years now. However, he's very modest, too modest to let us know and hear about him, except for what his work speaks for. And last but not the least, I'd like to present Dr. Ravi Perry, my dear colleague and friend. Dr. Ravi Perry is Professor of African American Studies. He's a pioneer in Black and ethnic studies. He served as Department Head of African American Studies at Eastern Michigan University from 1997 to 2003. He spent 27 years at Bowling Green State University, where he served as Director of Ethnic Studies Program for 10 years and 70 years as the Chair of the Department of Ethnic Studies. Dr. Perry has taught innumerable undergraduate and graduate courses and directed or consulted on many workshops. He has provided guidance for at least 3,000 of students seeking doctoral and master's degrees. His professional achievements include hundreds of publications, referee journal articles, book chapters, chairmanship of professional sessions, and presentations and discussions of papers. Now, I'd like to invite you to join me in a round of applause to welcome the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ferreira. At this time, we're going to kick off with the panel discussion. The way we're going to conduct the discussion is as follows. Each panelist will offer a 5-minute opening statement about his or her take on why Barack Obama was re-elected as President of the United States, even in the midst of an economy that's marked by a rather sluggish recovery. Thereafter, I will pose a few questions that the panelists will answer and then cross-talk. Once the question is posed, any panelist can respond to it, and other panelists can follow suit, one after another. Finally, members of the audience will have a chance to ask questions, one person at a time, after my own round of questions, and that part of the event will be handled by Professor Woods. I will start with the first question as follows. Obama was re-elected as President of the United States by winning both the popular vote and the Electoral College vote. A major television news talk show host, the Reverend Al Sharpton, has suggested that the results of the presidential election of 2012 demonstrated that Americans are now much more open-minded than ever before. However, in the aftermath of Obama's re-election, we witnessed a flood of petitions from several states for secession from the United States. What do you make of all this, panelists? The question is for you. You can answer it in any order that you choose.
I'm ready to answer that question. It won't take me 5 minutes. The citizens' petitions of secession from the United States initiated from some states, in my view, is a reflection of those select individuals who see the symbol of the President Barack Obama's re-election as a symbol of the country's diversity, the browning of America, as a threat to white supremacy, or as characterized by Patrick Kennedy, a former MSNBC talking head who was let go because of some of his views. He saw it as a form of cultural genocide, a threat to continuance of the dominance of Western culture. I think it's manifested by certain segments of the Tea Party, this particular attitude, by their anti-immigration stand against Mexican, Central and South American immigration. The ideology that spawns this caucus of the dead policy, I think, is a reflection of a repeat of history. It's something called the antics of the Know-Nothing Party. The Know-Nothing Party of the 1830s, which was anti-Catholic and Chinese immigration. It did not survive, nor will the present-day Tea attempts survive. All we have to see some of this beginning to crumble. As we see the Fox talking head, Sarah Palin has been recently let go. Dick Morris was let go, I understand, yesterday by Fox News. And when we think about people like Todd Akins that cost them an election because Todd Akins believed that women who were raped had the internal mechanisms to shut down any sperm that might cause them to be pregnant. I think the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I believe that those who despise the browning of the United States as they approach a majority will never be supported by this diversity, and they will not be trusted to govern. And that's how I see the impact of these statements and the meaning of these statements on secession.
Thank you. Go ahead, Eric.
We take a second to address the reason why he was re-elected. And let me also go on record to say that I did not vote for president in November 2012. I didn't think either candidate was worthy of my vote. But with that being said, the fact that he was re-elected has a lot to do with stupidity more than anything else. You just had too many talking heads that were speaking for themselves, and there was no one from the respective political parties that was brave enough to come out and condone the actions of those that were speaking. You had the Glenn Beck, the Sean Hannity's, the Russ Limbaugh's, and the Aaron Coulters of the world, as well as Dr. Perry mentioned, you had the Representative Akins making these statements, and no one came out to contest the statements that were being made. And that in and of itself speaks to the problem of politics in America. My stance on politics is that I'm not going to just give my vote away just to be voting, just for the sake of saying I voted. And to be clear, I voted in 2012 November. I just did not vote for president. I voted for all the proposals in Michigan, the senator and my state representative, as well as my U.S. congressperson. But I think it's time for us to realize that unless someone speaks to the issues that you believe in, then it's not worth, at least me, casting a vote. And I think I'm fortunate enough now to have a platform with a radio show as well as being a blogger for the last 7 years to be able to at least put out information that is not normally put out. And one of the things I do as it relates to my approach in writing blogs as well as my approach in my radio show to speak from a factual sense and not let those that have their own agenda dictate to me how I should be thinking. And even with regard to the question that was asked about whether or not we witnessed a flood of citizens, but with regards to Al Sharpton feeling that has demonstrated how much open-minded people are. Well, the fact that less people voted in 2012 than they did in 2008 shows that neither candidate was worthy of a lot of people's vote. That's one reason why you had a decrease in the amount of people that voted. But the secession piece is just out of ignorance and stupidity. Don't let the minority few think that that's how the majority of the nation feel. Those individuals that talked about seceding, I mean, that's ignorance. And if ignorance is allowed to be the standard of the day as it relates to how people feel about politics, then that says that we still have a long way to go in understanding politics ourselves. It's up to us as individuals to get on board and learn about the issues, become informed, and not let others dictate to you how you should be thinking, feeling, and or voting.
Barbara.
I will also be brief. Can you guys hear me? Right. I would first echo a part of what he said about the ignorance with several people seeking to succeed in the union. And I, being from the state of Mississippi, I watched in horror as with one of the universities of Mississippi, where the students rioted behind the election because they were upset. It's ignorance and a lack of class to some degree. But as to the election, if I could speak to a part of maybe what got the president reelected, I think some credit has to go to the strategy that his campaign used just on the ground with getting people out or getting their message out. While the money camp was, I guess, focused on the primary, the Obama camp was getting things together on the ground. On the flip side of that, the Republican Party, to me, has lost touch with the base of the American public. Their primary, or not their primary, their convention told the story of that to some degree. If you looked at the audience after the Republican convention, it did not look like America. If you compare it to the Democrat convention, it told the story. So those comments that were coming out, when you hear things like 47% of the people are waiting on a handout, or you hear if my dad was a Mexican, then I would have a better shot at winning this election. You're out of touch with this country. It makes no sense. If you can't give people also with Ravi a straight answer on some of the things that they're asking, these flip-flop things, it's a concern for the American public. So in the future, if Republicans seek to have, in my view, any success, they're going to have to leave behind the strategy that they used in the 1950s and look at the America as it exists today, because they are far out of touch with the American public.
Dr. Barak.
We were going to have an opening statement.
Yes.
Why the president won, which I will follow with Barbara here, who basically was addressing that. Then I'll speak to the record and specific questions. Very briefly, I don't think it's profound, I don't think it's rocket science why Obama was reelected. Four simple things. Because 51% of the voters identified with Obama and the Democratic Party's take on the issues, and only 47% of the voters identified with Romney and the Republican Party's take on the issues. Pretty elementary. Because most people, too, preferred, after all was said and done, Obamacare to the alternatives of Republicare or no care. 3, because the president demographically carried the younger voters, and he was politically on the correct side of gay, immigrant, women, and worker rights issues, while Romney and the Republican Party, as Barbara suggests, were clearly on the wrong side. 4, because the president's campaign, Barbara's first point in general, and his grounding and the use of the media in particular, were superior to that of its opponents, who even had far more money. In sum, Obama won because his opponent was pretty lame as a candidate, due in part to who Romney is, and due in part to the fact that he was squeezed or boxed in by 2 factions of the Republican Party that were lamer than he was. Okay, that's essentially why he won. He couldn't carry the white vote, as our keynote speaker said today. That's why he won. He couldn't carry the white vote, or he would have won. As to agreeing with Ralph Sharpton, I typically do. And in terms of this election, he said it was about no Obamacare. And he was right. It was about Medicare. It was about Social Security. It was about Obamacare. However, I do not think the 2012 election demonstrates that Americans as a whole are any more or less open-minded today than they were 4 years ago. In other words, I do not believe that those who cared whether Obama was black or white or mixed have changed. Most Americans did not care before Obama was elected in 2008, and most did not care before or after he was elected in 2012.
Joe.
Yes, I think the president was elected because of a coalition that clustered around him, and a coalition also that I believe very, very strongly as a future in moving the country to a progressive direction. The first act of that coalition, I will give credit to most of you who are here at the American youth that mobilized themselves in the name of social justice. This group redefined American politics in terms of away from the Tea Party to class politics, talking about the 99% versus the 1%, talking about mobilizing for the Occupy Wall Street, and making Romney's statement of the 47% fall in proper perspective as someone who was really out of touch. Second, the importance of the black vote as a significant part of the coalition has already been mentioned. The black vote and its importance was acknowledged by the president when he talked about Selma during the inauguration. Obviously, that was a reference to Dr. King's march from Selma to Montgomery. The black vote was the most significant. Black voters were not intimidated, not coerced, and in fact, they were the most sophisticated in the sense that they did not really strictly necessarily vote for the president, but they voted to defend the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The third coalition that brought the president to power was the Latino vote, threatened by statements that they should self-deport themselves. They rallied and gave the president 71% of the vote. Next, the American women. The president acknowledged that when he mentioned Seneca Falls. That was a historical meeting of the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca, New York, 1848. Women mobilized to defend their reproductive rights and equal rights for equal work. They responded to insults that were thrown at them on issues such as abortion, being told to perform transvaginal ultrasound tests, and all that nonsense. Women responded as a significant part of the coalition. Next were the American working class, especially the law of labor unions, very, very significant part of the coalition. They were the ones that provided the ground troops to mobilize votes for the president in the Rust Belt. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin was delivered to the president by the labor union, especially Ohio, something that Karl Rove could not stomach on Fox News. Then, equally important part of the coalition was the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community, LGBT. The president acknowledged that when he talked about Stonewall, the historical battle between the police and gay activists in Greenwich Village, New York City, June 28, 1969. LGBT mobilized against attempts to criminalize same-sex loving people under the banner of family values. They were important part of the coalition. And then finally, I don't have time to talk about this, but two other groups, the environmentalists, that was not quite well treated by the president during the first term in terms of his policies. But after Hurricane Sandy, they came to the forefront to make their point, and finally, the peace activists, again, not in the good books of the president's first term, them on board. So this coalition mobilized to put the president back in office in the second term. And it is in this coalition that we should look for another mobilization for the future in the second term.
Ravi, could you start with the question, since you have already pretty much addressed why he won? Could you start off with the question about whether this election demonstrated that Americans, as Al Sharpton put it, that Americans are now very much more open-minded than ever before?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, there's no data that we have, survey data that suggests that Americans are more open-minded. In fact, what we find is that there's an increased polarization between the races now than ever before. But I can understand why Reverend Al has that feeling. It felt that way, particularly in the ground game. There is one statistic that I think is interesting, that for the first time in a presidential election, I believe in a long time, we had close to 75% of voters, according to various polls, largely aggregated by Gallup, who already claimed that they knew who they were going to vote for by August of 2012. So the fact that the president did not perform well in the first debate, and that he did perform well in town halls, which he liked so much, later on, did not really matter, because the majority of the population already voted, and really he only needed to try to ensure another 10 or 15% of the vote, which obviously he did very well. I don't think that the country has somehow more rose-colored glass feelings respective to diversity and some of the key issues that the Obama administration embodies. But I do think that the generational increased demographic numbers that all the expert panelists have talked about suggest that we are going in that direction, and perhaps that's what Reverend Al was trying to engender us to begin to think about the future. I do think it's too premature to say that those feelings, however, change, and that this election is an example of that. Clearly, because of the successions and because of the low vote that the president received in a lot of deep South states from white voters, indicates that that clearly is not the case.
Oh, thank you. Let's move quickly to the next question. President Obama has announced his domestic policy priorities for his second term, including a reform of federal laws pertaining to gun control, passage of immigration reforms, a deficit and tax deal with the Republicans, making America more competitive in the world, and improving the status of middle-class America. Did he get his priorities right in his second-term agenda? Is his second-term agenda ambitious enough?
I don't think it's a question of whether or not Obama's second-term agenda is ambitious enough. That is to say, it's not really about his or anyone else's priorities as much as it is about policies that are and are not proposed to achieve those priorities. Permit me to briefly provide an example of each. In the case of immigration reform, most everybody in this room probably thinks that in the very near future, some kind of so-called comprehensive legislation will be passed. However, I would argue that neither Obama's proposal nor the bipartisan Senate proposal will do anything significantly to address the contradictory relations of labor and capital that underlie the issues of immigration reform. For perspective, and to reveal how the United States has regressed on the issue of immigration reform over the past 33 years, consider that both of the current proposals are politically to the right of what President Reagan was proposing back in 1980, when he wanted to open up all borders in both directions. Also recall that Ronald Reagan argued that the last thing the United States needed to do was to build a fence to keep immigrants out. So he might, if he came back today, say to Obama, tear down that wall. Okay? As for any priorities to make the U.S. more competitive or to improve the status of middle and working class people, this is essentially nothing but empty rhetoric. In other words, show me the policy proposals that are being discussed today by the President, by the Senate, or the House to accomplish these alleged priorities of both parties. You simply cannot do it because they do not exist.
Barbara?
I'm an education policy person, so I think more attention needs to be paid to education policy. I think Race to the Top has serious problems, and they were not addressed thoroughly in the 2012 election process, and it's something that needs to be looked at. The March on Wall Street was not well put together, but they did raise valid issues, and those issues have not came to the forefront. I think the immigration reform is important, but if we're being realistic, the immigration reform, a part of it is politics. And they're going after the Hispanic vote. And so what do? You put something on the table, or you come to the table with a piece of legislation which may not be well crafted. And you make arguments that have been made in the past under the Reagan administration, and you sell it. So for me, how do I say this? It's good to pay attention to the immigration reform, but you have to look at the quality of what's being proposed. Has similar legislation been proposed in the past, and has it worked or not? I think it's a political tool.
Bob?
I agree very much with what's been said by Ray. I think his priorities for the second term make sense, but however, he's presently, for example, confronted with the sequester that takes effect on March 1, which will cause automatic cuts to go into effect that will negatively largely affect the military, education, healthcare, assorted number of welfare programs that largely only affect the poor and the middle class. And if there's no compromise, there's a possibility of the slowing of the economy and the economy walking into another recession. So his major issues, is trying to avoid the physical cliff, modifying the sequester, trying to reduce carbon effects on climate change, and immigration reform. And immigration reform and the problems with that have already eloquently been spoken to. All of these things depend on how much compromise he can achieve with 113 Congress, and I would not hold my breath.
Joe?
I think the priorities make sense, and in fact, I want more to be focused on, but it has to be pushed. And I was happy to note that the President has retained some of the personnel that helped get him elected to take some of those issues on the agenda to the grassroots. And I think that would be productive. In other words, the priorities are right, more can be done, but they must be enforced, and political pressure must be exerted down to the grassroots, especially in local politics, which Dr. Ravi alluded to earlier.
Eric?
The one thing that we all must be very honest and serious about is when you look at these priorities, they are nothing more than pandering attempts as well as rhetoric. I mean, you have gun control laws that are already in place. Enforce those laws before you try to enact new laws. There's a reason why the Congress has the lowest satisfaction rate ever in the history of this country. Unfortunately, though, those that live in Michigan, we feel that our Congress people are those that we elect are doing a good job, but we feel negatively about the Congress people and senators in the other 49 states. Those other 49 states feel the same way about their own that they send to D.C., that they send to their state capitals. That's why you keep getting the same old elected officials year in and year out. The founding fathers never set it up for it to be a lifetime job for someone to be elected to senator or the U.S. Congress position. But we have two of the longest serving, ineffective Congress people in D.C. right now. Both of them are named John. And that's part of the problem with D.C., that's part of the problem with politics in general. The electorate tend to take a blind eye to all the complaints that they have, but they still send the same people back to do an ineffective job. So until you start holding your elected officials accountable, the policies that are made in D.C. will continue to be nothing more than rhetoric.
Ravi?
I'll quickly say that first of all, most of us have no idea what exactly the president helped to ensure in terms of policy. But on the one hand, there's administrative policy and there's actual legislation. It's important for us to understand what the president can actually do. The president does not enforce law. It's not the president's job. The president is the head of the executive branch, and I'm not going to give a lesson on what that means today, but essentially, we have to understand what is in the position of the power of the president to actually do. And frankly, as Americans, we tend to require more of any president than what is actually in the job description of what they are able to actually do. And most of that power really rests with Congress. I think it's important to emphasize that. But I do want to say that I think that the policies from the last term, many of them can be built upon. I just want to go through just a little quickly 4 or 5 of them and just list them, things that we probably don't realize that he actually did. He insisted that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency expands the definition of the term members of a family residing in one household. What does that do? Well, that then includes people who have earned domestic relationships and U.S. people who are returning residents so they can file joint customs declaration forms and articles abroad. In other words, it increases the definition of what a family is. Things like that were done that were important. Obviously, we know he pushed for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He wrote several presidential memorandums that were issued to various departments throughout the federal government that insisted that people of whatever stripe and color, whatever sexual orientation, whatever religious identity was protected under the federal government. He signed into law the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Act, Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which extends federal coverage to hate crimes to include victims of sexual orientation and gender identity. He signed the Claims Resolution Act of 2010, which provided authority for the settlement agreement that reached in the Pickford lawsuits that basically African American farmers had long sued the government for not getting their fair share of federal grants and funds to help run their own farms. He signed that, gave them their millions of dollars of money that no other president was able to do. He signed the Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the disparity in the amounts of powder cocaine and crack cocaine that were required to trigger certain penalties. And of course, we understand that this is important in terms of ending the Reagan-era so-called war on drugs because it had a disproportionate impact right on African Americans. I mean, so there was a lot done that we honestly don't know about. And I would encourage you to not read what was in the media because they are only going to highlight things that are perhaps significant to a broader population. But actually go look it up. You can go to websites that were created, like healthcare.gov, and actually type in your own private information and get your own details about your current healthcare situation. Things like that are things that we don't pay attention to. But those are things that can change depending on the occupant of the White House. So I would say that he has actually accomplished a lot administratively, but there has to be much more attention paid to what can be done in the congressional arena. And frankly, most of the things that were tried in the congressional arena were unable to pass because of Republican obstructionism. That's not President Obama's fault.
Bob, I think you have something to say about that.
No, pretty much I'm nodding my head.
Oh, okay.
Agreeing with the young Mr. Perry.
Okay.
Dr. Perry.
Very good. In that case, I would like to shift attention to the foreign policy arena. On February the 5th, during that day's edition of Morning Joe, One of the guests was Michael Isikoff, an NBC national investigative correspondent, who was credited with revealing what was described as a Justice Department memo that makes a legal case for killing Americans overseas if they are believed to be senior operational leaders of Al-Qaeda or an associated force, even if there was no intelligence indicating that they are engaged in an active plot to attack the United States on foot. Reacting to this memo, Mr. Joe Scarborough, host of the early morning show, said, and I quote, "The U.S. drone policy is far more questionable than President George W. Bush's long criticized rendition, interrogation, and torture policies," unquote. Continuing, he said, and I quote again, "Here you've got a situation where the U.S. government is killing Americans without judicial review, without any crimes being charged against them," unquote. What's the panel's take on this controversial drone policy of the Obama administration?
I'll take it, since
Yes.
it was one of my three proposals here. As the number, let me just put these in quick order. As the number one threat for the citizens of the world, I would like to see the president seriously emphasize climate change and the need to dramatically reduce carbon emissions or face the meltdown of human and animal species everywhere. In short, he needs to seriously go green, which he's yet to do. As to the drones, I would also like to see the president emphasize the development of international rules for using drones while he simultaneously reins in the U.S.'s deployment of drones as well as the U.S.'s indiscriminate extrajudicial killings of innocent people, including the American citizens, as well as the assassination of alleged terrorists. In short, probable cause, suspicion, cross-examination, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 8th Amendments are all being abolished under this rhetoric of an alleged or evident threat. There's no international law, there's no domestic law supporting these actions.
Go ahead.
I'll be very brief. I'm a fan of due process. I'm a fan of civil rights. That's all I have to say. Due process, you go through, you have to respect the rights of other people, and you need to give them the opportunity to respond. You have to have evidence.
Eric?
I agree, because the conflict that we got into with regard to Iraq was a result of not having specific information. There was more or less allegations, and even former Secretary of State, well, Colin Powell even stated that he went on some suspicions as regards to weapons of mass destruction, but there was no real proof. Even some of the satellite shots you saw of them allegedly having WMDs, it was still an allegation. And the way we went after Iraq still has us in a conflict with regard to being in Afghanistan right now. But it's still a matter, we just can't, as an American, as America, we just can't be the police for everyone in the world. We have our own problems here in the United States, here in the urban areas that need to be dealt with, that should be a priority, no matter who the president is. You take 2016, the next person that comes into the office, they have to be very cognizant of the fact that problems exist here that need to be rectified before we try and be the Democratic police for the rest of the world.
Bob?
Well, I think we need to go back to 9/11 and how we got into the different kinds of international war against Al-Qaeda. And I'd like to raise the question that when you're not at war at stake, how do you fight that kind of war? There's no precedent for that. Being president under those circumstances is a complex kind of business. And I'd like to lead the audience and lead the panel with that. How do you fight that kind of war? Who has the answer for that? when you have international terrorism that can occur anywhere in the world, what is one to do?
Ravi?
I'll follow up. So the question really here, really the thing we're talking about is really loss of life, right? That's what we're really concerned about. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't frankly care. Yes, we're concerned about due process and civil rights, but honestly, we're concerned about that because we know that people have been killed by drones, and we have made that decision as a country because we have chosen not to send our men and women in uniform on the ground in harm's way. Now, the question is, should we just divorce ourselves from having an influence and what some consider a responsibility in other countries to help them in some way, shape, or form? I don't know if we want to have that role. I think it's easy to say, oh, well, we have to get our own house in order before we attack global problems. Well, unfortunately, this is a global society, and so we are still viewed throughout the world as a leading nation, if not the leading nation, and we sell ourselves as having the largest, best, biggest, boldest, baddest military in the world. And so the fact that we have come up with a new way to attack terrorism that is hidden, that minimizes our loss of life, unless you're willing to say that we need to become a pacifist nation, what alternative do we have? It's a difficult position for me because I'm someone who does not support war in 99% of instances. But at the same time, I do understand the reasons behind using drones as opposed to using actual human life. There are mistakes made in war all the time. People die accidentally all the time. And so unless you're just going to say that we should just somehow make ourselves like Switzerland and just try to avoid being in any actual conflict, then unless you're prepared to say that, I don't understand what alternative we have.
Can I make a quick response to that? First of all, we have more urban terrorism going on in the streets of our cities than the amount of individuals that have been killed at war over the last few years. So that's something that the Americans need to address. Dealing with the urban terrorism that is going on right here down the street in Detroit, right here in go west in Chicago. So to say that we should not be this country that does not, care about what goes on in other countries when we need to worry about what's going on here. Get our own house in order. We say it to our kids and also our family. I was brought up in the rule that you get your own self in order before you worry about being the antagonistic individual, which in some instances that's how people view America, as this antagonistic society that involves themselves in everyone else's business, but we have our own business to control. But it's mighty funny how so many people are being quiet about the urban terrorism that is going on here in our own country.
Joe?
I think first there has to be a sharper break with the militaristic policies of the Bush administration. As I understood it, the priority of Obama was to promote State Department to a level of prominence of just as prominent as defense. For the purposes of negotiations and promoting democratic reforms. That has not happened on a significant degree. The drones uses have been intensified. The president was behind directly and indirectly the NATO invasion of Libya. Guantanamo Bay prison has not yet been closed. And in the case of other parts of the world, like the African continent that I'm familiar with, the militaristic policies have continued. AFRICOM, created during the Bush administration, the U.S. African Command, based in Germany, is still operating, deploying those militaristic policies, going with the CIA, military personnel, private contractors in different parts of Africa to manipulate and throw confusion The administration has continued to create policies, for example, in Africa, making certain leaders of certain countries privileged and then working with them to promote militaristic solutions to issues that should be settled and approached democratically. I am embarrassed over the years that have been born and grown up. I have seen this. I was born during the decolonization period. America's record there is not good. Lumumba assassinated, Mobutu imposed in power, the Congo in a mess, Angola, Jonas Savimbi pumped up by this administration. Just as Africa was trying to pull itself out of those and embark on progressive economic policies, the 80s, Lagos Plan of Action, this administration deployed World Bank, IMF, structural adjustment policies that ruined countries. Right now, 90s up to today, African states are trying to regroup to forge what Nkrumah called the United States of Africa under the African Union. That is being undermined by these policies of supporting authoritarian leaders, making them privileged, like those in Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, using them to destabilize others, Algeria and all that, using notions of the war on terror, when in fact the definition of war on terror is different for those countries as well as those countries can create their own war on terror and derail the policies of the administration. So it is very, very frustrating, but there has to be a shift. I do not like militaristic solutions. African Command, AFRICOM, was created by presidential directive. This president can abolish it tomorrow, also using a presidential directive.
Bob and James. Okay, Greg and then Bob. Greg and Bob.
I totally agree with him. And if he wants to intimate to the world he's going to change those policies, let the president sign the arms trade treaty as a means to try to keep weapons out of the hands of the dictators and the warlords who use them to perpetuate mass killings and genocide.
Bob.
In terms of taking care of our own business first, and in terms of foreign policy, and in terms of the whole idea of American exceptionalism, what are we supposed to do? What is America supposed to do? Foreign policy is American. There is no specific piece of legislation that will remove Assad from Syria, bring Iran in compliance in terms of acceptable nuclear power, forge a deal between Israel and the Palestinians, not to mention North Korea's recent antics, not to mention what's happening between Japan and China in terms of territorial ownership disputes. I mean, what is America supposed to do? They're supposed to become isolationists? What is the role of this government? Is to forget about all of that, what's going on in the Middle East? I raise that as an issue. I continue to say these matters are complex.
I agree with that. And I guess on the follow-up, that's a very good question, is what should we do and how should we do it? But I do think we have to be very careful with how we approach these issues. And it becomes scary when we make a statement that in war, innocent people die. They do. So it's kind of okay. It's how far do you push it? And when do we start asking those questions and when you use those tactics? I don't know. If we're going to sell ourselves as humanitarians and as big brothers, at some point you got to hold up to that. And I do understand when you're fighting an enemy who uses different tactics, is how am I supposed to respond maybe who you are, and the image that you're selling in that response.
Ravi?
I would just say briefly, I have to say I agree, and really in part with everybody. There have been more people killed in Chicago in the last 10 years than were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is a domestic problem that we are not addressing. But the question is not just to create Socratic questions for us to get us thinking. I want to hear actual concrete policy proposals. What do we expect the president to do? And I will actually want answers to that question. How do we expect the president to solve a local murder problem in Chicago? Yes, that is his adopted hometown. That's his wife's hometown. But seriously, I mean, what do we actually expect to do? What would we like to see them do? We like Congress. Well, then that's not the president. Well, I mean, what do we want? I mean, all the president can really do in that instance, and this is unfortunate. I'm not saying that this is a good thing. It's just the way the Constitution is written. All the president can really do is go and give a speech that says that this is really bad, and we feel sorry, and we have to do something about it, and he can maybe dispatch some of his policy leaders to go to Chicago to use their resources and talents and their funds to try to make an impact. But as we talked about in terms of the gun control debate in this country, just having universal background checks would not have eliminated the opportunity for the murderers who we had recently murder innocent school children, right? So the question is I agree with the important nature of Socratic questions to get us thinking, but in terms of actual policy, what do we expect the president to do, particularly when you have a Republican Congress whose electoral base is nowhere near urban communities? And so the impetus for them to do anything for urban communities is nil, zilch. And so I would encourage us to maybe really think about what's something concrete the president can do. I appreciate some of the actual things in terms of memorandums he can do, in terms of treaties, things that he can do by himself. But again, that will disappear when President Obama disappears. And so that's not even a sustained impact. And so we're actually thinking about how we can solve these systemic domestic problems for the long term. It goes back to congressional legislation. You've got to elect people who you think are going to solve those questions through the legislative arena. It's not going to happen from the White House.
When you talk about public policy, particularly, and when you're looking at foreign relations, the Middle East is a powder keg. And unless you get something that happens through serendipity, even the opportunity to set policy will not occur. And that's the reality of what's going on in the Middle East. We don't even know how the so-called Arab Spring that started a year or so ago, where that's going. Not to mention all the other conflicts that exist in the Middle East. Now, are we supposed to back away from all of that and become isolationists like they are in Switzerland? I mean, it's complex. And it's one thing to argue for policy, but you got to have the opportunity that allows you to develop something, to bring about significant change, if you're going to engage.
I think there are two
Barbara.
questions. There are two very different questions on the floor. And I think the first one is the separation of one, should we focus on what's going on at home, as opposed to the international conflict? That's one segment. The other segment is when it comes to international relations as it relates to military tactics and how we respond. So two very different things. I would like, and I know we can't continue on this, but with the elder, Dr. Perry, a discussion of how we respond. I would love to hear that discussion on how we respond on the international front if we separate that from the domestic angle. If we focus the conversation there, because that's an important piece with the use of drones, is how do we respond to what's going on, and how do you fight a war? And I guess the tactics that they're using are very different from what you are used to. But on the same front, it is what your country stands for and what you are promoting is How do you make those distinctions and draw those lines as a response?
The only reason why I raised that is I know after this year, the president's going to probably be able to get very little done in the Congress. Presidents like to turn their attention to foreign policy in the last years of their administration because they don't need the Congress. But for what he can do, or what he or she will be able to do, given who's president, largely depends on how opportunity presents itself to bring about change in those regions. He could become one of the greatest presidents on earth that ever lived if the opportunity presented itself to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But he's not going to be able to create that opportunity so much himself without an opening occurring between the kind of dialogue and relations that occur between those two countries.
Joe, and then we turn it over to the audience.
Okay, on the international front, we should probably distinguish between hotspots, like Dr. Perry was talking about, the Middle East and all that, and other areas where there are genuine democratic struggles happening from the bottom up. Okay? In some of those situations, and in some of those countries, I hate to say this, the best policy for the United States is probably to just leave them alone. Yes. Second, when the United States engages with this country, one of the issues that has led to distortions and derailing of the people's struggle is this whole issue of war on terror. It is very easy for authoritarian rulers, I know examples of them in Africa, to claim a threat of a war or of terror, to even create the presence of an Al-Qaeda that doesn't exist, to collude with the US with totally different objectives. So, if you don't understand the political and economic situation in a particular area and you want to be neutral about it, just keep out. And to be careful when you deal with certain leaders of those countries. The president should be aware of this. When he was a senator, he participated and had evidence of what was going on the ground in some of these troubled spots. So it's not like it's something new. And he should also be aware that this style of commandist politics was one of the issues that kind of ruined his father's own career, leading to his premature demise under authoritarian governments of Kenya.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like to invite my colleague, Professor Woods, to field questions from the audience and to wrap it up.
Thank you, Dr. Okafor. Thank you, panel. Let's first give them a hand, please. I will not attempt any shaping or framing. I think you can see that there is a range of issues here, a range of perspectives. We've gone from some of the more theoretical matters to the very specific question of policy issues. Let me open this up. Let me ask that those of you who do have questions, if you will come to the microphone, raise your hand however you would like to do that. So please, I know our numbers are not what they were a bit earlier, but please do come forward. Please do come forward. Don't hesitate, man. Thank you. And if as you come forward, you would give your name and then proceed as you will. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm the pharmacist at the Health Center, Snow Health Center, and I just wanted to make a comment about health care. I I've been in healthcare for over 20 years, and I see the discrepancy between, African Americans and non-white Americans. And I had a situation where I was in the hospitalized for the first time in my life. I'm usually a healthy athlete. And I had a situation that should be common. It's a female problem. And I have my white sisters, because it was a female problem, I think females would know my body. So I thought in my mind that, OBs, women would be the answer. So I have also an internal medicine doctor that's female, and she gave me someone, and the female OB was young, and she just proceeded to give me the most cheapest medication that did not work. And I was doing some female problems, and I was hemorrhaging for like 3 months, and she was like, my doctor internal said, oh, I want to take her off work, but the other one said, no, we'll just give her something. And then my other doctor just said, take her off work, because I was doing this, as I'm a strong, ex-athlete, I don't know if they were collecting data, like how long can she bleed without she falling out? And so I don't know this specialty, OBGYN, because pharmacy school did not teach us this. And so thank God for my African, she's a white American from Africa, internal medicine. She told me, I need you to drop this female, and I need you to go to this male. And my little, I don't believe in male OBGYNs, because how do they know what we got, But I am so glad I listened to her, and I was just it's so sad that I actually saw the $800 medicine that she did not want to give me eventually got to me, and it was just, what I'm saying is we have to do something about healthcare, the discrepancy. I have seen as a pharmacist, UTIs, urinary tract infection for women. African Americans get the cheapest, I guess they're assuming, they don't have insurance anyway, so we'll give the penny medication. And the other women, she has insurance, so they give the more expensive. But that was 10 years ago. Now, 20 years ago, thank God, all the medications are generic. And I'm thank God for the 10-year patent. And I just think that we as women, we need to get together, black or white. It's just healthcare is not equal. And I just want good healthcare, because I don't want to be like my mom and die early, and my dad. And I see, as the education I have, I just want to live long and strong. But I have the knowledge, and I just want you to tell your family and friends, before you go see these doctors, you got to do your research, because if they think you're an idiot, they're like, she don't know. And they just give you, it's just so sad, and I just want you people, you doctors up there, help us. They look at me and they think, you're just not educated. And then when I come out, then they're shocked. It's like, you know what, but what if I wasn't this pharmacist? And we got to do something, and in that we can just start healthcare. And granted, of course, my money, we can talk about that later, but being up here with the pharmacists, I do make what my white female brothers and sisters make. It's just, when you get up there, it's just all a flat feet. It's dropping, but at least there's no racism up there. I mean, in this, like this, but healthcare, I don't know how to help, but we're talking about it, and I can give you more stories. Because as I continue this 20 years journey, the healthcare, the brother man is not being treated for heart problems as quickly as the white brothers. And we all want to live long and strong, we really do. It's besides just losing weight, because my doctor says I'm obese, which is crazy to me, but that's another, I'm gonna stop right now, but healthcare.
Thank you. Ma'am, can you tell me your name again? I mean, if you...
I am Dr. Easter. I have a PharmD, and I'm working at the Snow Health Center as a pharmacist. And I'm also an advocate for just the poor. Yes, my brother is on a bike. I just want to let you know we got a lot of the bikers in Detroit to vote. My brother, I don't understand what happened to him. My mom, I just don't understand how my brothers... I said, what you mean you never voted? What's wrong with you? So we got a lot of the people that live under Cobo Hall, where the heat is. We got a lot of the brothers that, I said, this is history. Let's just, there was a motivation. I never been interested in politics until, you know, his wife doesn't look like me, they say. And so I just was just more, I never knew the man. I never knew Obama. I was in a union, they said, Hillary is who you're gonna vote for. And then when Hillary was, we thought she was up there, and then Obama was coming up, and the union, and my organization I'm in, that I pay dues to, said, you're gonna vote for Clinton, and Hillary, and it was just, and then I had to educate myself, who is this man? And you know, and I know they say the black vote, we didn't know him until late to me in the Detroit area, and I was in a union, and they told us what to do, and I was trying to protect my green money. That's, you know, that's what I was trying to do.
Well, thank you. Now, let me just ask, and thank you, Dr. Easter. There's several dimensions here, one of them being the healthcare issue, and with those on the panel care to offer any observations, and thank you for those of you coming forward.
Well, having been in the healthcare industry since 1987, from customer service and underwriting to now HR, is very incumbent upon people to, same with politics, you have to ask questions, you know, of your provider as well as your insurance carrier, because when you get this booklet of your plan, it used to not be a very easily to read document. What we have done at Blue Cross Blue Shield and Blue Care Network, we have made the rights of the members first and foremost important to us. So we try to put together a pamphlet at such a readable level. It's at the 6th grade level, people can read. We made it that way on purpose, so people can read it, because unfortunately when you work for someone, all they do is give you your insurance plan, here, this is what you have. It's important to you to find out exactly what's covered and what's not covered. People will be amazed that emergency room co-pays are only waived under certain conditions. Generic is the way that the healthcare industry is going, unfortunately, because unless you get a doctor to write you the premier medicine, which is to be dispensed as written, you would probably have to have an act of God to get that approved by your healthcare carrier. But unfortunately, due to the cost, and we have allowed that cost to rise because everyone wants what's considered the best medicine. There are so many experimental medicines that are still out there that people believe in because they read it in Home and Garden magazines, People magazine, all these magazines, they think that's what they want. But ask questions of your doctors as well. We are very concerned about the bedside manners of our physicians that have to go through a credentialing process to become providers with Blue Cross Blue Shield. So ask them questions. Do not let them just bring you to a room, look at you, give the eyeball test, and then they know what's wrong with you. No, ask questions. I mean, if you have to spend 45 minutes to an hour with your doctor, do that, because you've earned that right by having the health care insurance that you do have. So ask the questions.
Thank you.
If I can make one brief comment, I'm so happy that you brought this issue up and you were seeking for a purpose. Right before I left Mississippi State, I served in a dissertation for a young lady who was looking at this very issue with breast cancer. If you look at the quality of care that African American women get and the quality of care that white women get, night and day difference. And for a lot of the white women, if you look at even the offices, the local offices with the access to information that they have, it is a very different quality than what the African American women are going to get. And what we have found out, or what we found out with her work, a part of it has to start at the grassroots level, at the bottom to some degree, because as bad as this sounds, stereotypes and racism, that doesn't go away. And there are grassroots organizations in the state of Mississippi that have come about as a result of some of the work that she has done, that has tried to do a better job at educating people about their options. But as it relates to the healthcare field, you're right. Her studies show that as soon as you walk in that door and they see that you are an African American, they make certain assumptions. And those assumptions will impact the quality of care that you will get. And the way to change that is to try to better educate women and to push for, in Mississippi, we realized that there were some federal funds available to get better education to people, but those things were not being pursued. So it's up to people like you in this area to start pushing for those types of measures that will impact and touch African American women.
Yeah. There's some others coming. I just want to say one thing, because I teach a course related to African American health. And one of the facts is white women tend to have a higher incidence of breast cancer than black women, but black women die at a higher rate than white women.
Yes.
That makes it very, very clear what the issues are in regard to that particular problem, and that is access to care.
I'll add one thing really quickly. Stigma is a huge problem in the Black community. We are not very forthcoming with not only our doctors, but ourselves about our health issues. Today is National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day. We don't talk about it, right? We don't talk about it with our family members. We don't talk about it with our romantic partners. We don't talk about it with our pastors. You don't, and if you don't, and unfortunately, if you don't go and talk about it, like my track brother was saying, at the doctor, then you essentially are giving yourself a death sentence. We have to, as people of color in particular, particularly women, particularly people who engage in what doctors consider risky behaviors of various kinds, whether it be eating or sexual activity or drinking or whatever it might be, you have to take ownership of your own health. If you don't, they're not going to do it for you, because you are one of 200 patients they have to see in any given day. They don't have time to spend 45 minutes with you. You have to force them to spend that time with you. And if you don't do that, then you're shortchanging your own life.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to, ma'am, I don't want you to, please do come. Well, thank you for that, but we surely do want to hear from you. And if you'll give us your name.
My name is Amy Lipscomb. I'm a part-time lecturer. Thank you. This is really informative. And also, the last topic I think that the panel stopped talking about was the drone issue. Wasn't that the last one? And you know, in the audience, you're thinking about the complexities of and the seriousness of the issue. But I wondered if you could comment on, you know, my way of thinking about this would be that it is out of hand and that there is no international, you know, regulations and laws in place. But if we, like the U.S. and our allies that have, you know, some sort of power or whatever, if we find that other nations that aren't our allies have that as a capacity to also start doing the same kind of warfare or whatever, don't you think that at that point that will be when we say, okay, now enough is enough? So as regular citizens, not to take this off the list of, you know, what we should be worried about. But you guys mentioned domestic stuff, but which we care about, you know, day to day. Then the drone issue coming up is so much for regular citizens to wrap their head around. So my question would be, wouldn't it be the case, probably logically thinking, that if somewhere like, you know, North Korea, which we know that they have, you know, nuclear weapons stuff going on, let's say a country like Pakistan starts flying their own drones, then wouldn't the U.S. and our allies start saying, okay, now we need international laws and we need regulations, and that maybe it won't be resolved, but something will happen other than what's going on now?
Well, quick answer to that. I mean, I think when there is quantifiable intelligence to know that our enemies has something to use against us, then we have to react. I mean, that's just, you know, the laws of the land when it comes to war. If you have the intelligence to prove that the enemies have something they're going to use against us to destroy, kill, or do whatever to Americans, then that is something that will warrant us reacting. But when you do not have the proof and you're just going on an assumption, you know, bottom line with me is have that proof first before attacking North Korea or some other so-called enemy.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you have to have that impetus, and that's unfortunate the way, at least the way American public policy works. I won't speak for anybody else. But that's the only reason why we were talking about gun control. It's because children died. Otherwise, it was not on the agenda. It was they tried it in private meetings in the White House in 2009, 2010. They decided not to bring it up and didn't think it would pass. This is Vice President Biden, who originally started the initiative with Dianne Feinstein in the late 80s and early 90s. It was his bill that he pushed, and he decided that it was not worth pursuing until children died. So unfortunately, unless you're absolutely right, and the same thing goes with drones. In the United States, we are a reactive country when it comes to public policy. Unless something happens, We are not going to get over the impediments that make it impossible for things to happen in any day. And so, unfortunately, it took young children to die innocently, and some staff members and teachers as well were about to get Presidential Citizens Awards in order for us to really, all of us, frankly, really care about gun control. I mean, all the people you can think of, your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues who might have been interested in gun control, you weren't talking about it until Newtown either. No, I mean, none of us were really engaged in that discussion seriously until something affected us individually. And that's how American gun policy works, and so that's how it's going to be with drones as well.
Well, not really. Not really. I mean, you have to put the context in. There are 50 countries that have drones already. Regulation, we're not about regulation. We're about being above the rule of law. That's our history. We don't sign the international court. We don't join the court. We don't do any of those things. We want everybody else to abide by the law, but we don't want to abide by the law. If we don't abide by the law, nobody else has to abide by the law. That's the bottom line. As far as the drones, you didn't have to fire one of those drones. You haven't gone after anyone who is eminently threatening anybody here. And if you want to pick those people up to prove that they are who you allege that they are with the bad intelligence that we have, then fine. Use your drone. You know where they are. You hover over them for days at a time before you fire. You can deploy humans to pick them up. Just like that, the rest of them go.
Thank you. We'll move on. And Greg, I heard a program this morning. I'm not sure, but I think that number is now up to 70.
That's the official number.
Yeah, thank you. But please,
and I wanted to say one other thing. Just by the notion that we've only had less deaths in Iraq or Iran than we had in Chicago, that's absurd. That's just ethnocentric American speaking. We've had hundreds of thousands of people killed in Iraq and Iran. It dwarfs the number in Chicago or in America. But of course, we never look at it globally. We only look at it, selfishly.
Yeah, I was speaking something now. I mean, I was speaking regarding known American deaths.
Right, I understand that. That's how we always talk about it.
Right, and that is problematic.
Unfortunately, where we're at. Oh, there's a few
deaths in Iraq. You
Yeah.
don't know how many people
Right.
died.
We're talking 750,000 deaths.
At least, right.
We're talking about 5 million people in Iraq that are babies that don't reach the age of 5 because we sanction them. You want to know what you do? If you've got 300 bases around the world, you pull them back. You don't involve, and you get into that thing called nation building. It isn't isolationism versus, war. That's absurd. There's only one country in the world declaring and making war on anybody. That's us.
Also, war is brutal, and when you use drones like that, you sort of give the impression that somehow you can skillfully undermine or play down the atrocity caused by war. When you resort to things like deploying special forces, you make it look sophisticated, like you can do things skillfully without, that sort of warfare, I think, came about because the peace movement sort of made a difference, and is part of adjusting to the pressure of the peace movement to make war look less brutal. I am against militarism of any form, whether they're done by drones, special forces, or
also against the so-called nation building. I mean, you don't have no business going into other countries and telling them how to put together their own country, their own nation, and what values they ought to have, and try to make them a carbon copy of our so-called democracy. That's bullshit.
Thank you. Please.
Hello. My name is Gabrielle, and I'm an African American Studies major.
Gabrielle, can you speak a little bit more to the mic there?
Okay.
Thank you, Gabrielle.
I'm excited to have this question because I'm taking a class with Dr. Woods right now, which is law in the African
who were attacking President Obama initially, and I don't think that it was a critique, it was more like an attack, because I feel like we expect him to solve all of these issues, and like Dr. Ravi Perry was saying, it's not in his job jurisdiction to solve all of those things. And I was just wondering, what exactly do you expect for him to do as it pertains to social issues in America? What kind of resolutions are you looking for him to offer?
I do think that's I think that's a great question. I think that's a fair question. We absolutely have to be critical of any person who is elected to represent us. That includes the President of the United States. And so I don't think any of us were meant to presume that we're attacking the president, but we do have serious concerns about his agenda, at least domestically, right? I mean, there are particularly as a Democrat, the Democratic Party has been able to, frankly, capture real kind of like domestic issues, really until President Obama. This is the first Democratic president that is assumed to be stronger, really, on foreign policy than he is on domestic policy, and that's an interesting question, particularly for people of color, right? Because you have this, because of all the statistics that all of us have talked about today. I mean, there are some serious questions that we should be asking the president, and there are some other things that he could do that he is not doing in terms of treaties, in terms of presidential memoranda, in terms of more executive orders, and he could impact a lot of the domestic issues from that perspective, but even that would be limited, as my earlier comment said. But I do think it's important to be critical of any elected official, and particularly the President of the United States. And I think to the extent that we do that effectively, then presumably we make our democracy better.
Thank you. Others?
Yeah, I guess I would say that I wasn't really being particularly critical of Obama, and I'm not particularly critical of Obama. I just see him as, exemplifying a system that I'm very much critical of, Republican and Democrat alike. I mean, what can we do? You have to ask yourself, if you're the richest nation in the world, and if you took the money that you spent for 2 weeks in Afghanistan, you could underwrite all the school loans in the country and put everybody in college. That's what you could do if you wanted to do it. You can sign the thing tomorrow, wiping out that student loan debt. You can ask yourself, in the richest place on earth, why do we still have poverty? And why is it growing? And why is poverty a dirty word that nobody brings up? When we could make a move to eradicate it and eliminate it. We've known that since the 60s. We could do it tomorrow if we had a desire to do so. We have no desire whatsoever to do that.
And I could not agree with Greg and Ravi more, and very good question. And one of the things that I espouse is you have no choice but to be critical of those that you entrust to lead you. And these are individuals that are elected to leadership roles. It's incumbent upon them to become those leaders. And as the pharmacist was saying, I'll never forget, and I was involved in this situation in February 2007. I was the only person at this event to endorse Senator Obama at the time. It was a union-sponsored event, and as you stated, they were on the bandwagon of Hillary Clinton. What impressed me about him initially, what got me involved with him, is in 2004 when he spoke at the Democratic Convention in Boston. That's when I learned and became aware of Barack Hussein Obama. That's when I started doing my research. So when he announced his candidacy in Illinois in February 2007, I did some additional research. As a matter of fact, I was one of the first to publicly go on record through a blog and anything else to endorse Barack Obama for president. My expectation with regards to him have not been met based on what Greg just stated, is the fallacies in politics is what has turned me off. He turned out to be, in my opinion, nothing more than a part of the status quo that is in DC. That's why I made a very cognizant effort to really look at all of the candidates in 2008, the incumbent as well as the 2,400 Republicans that are trying to take his job. In the end, on November the 6th, I just did not have enough conscience within me to cast a vote for either one of the people running for president.
I can understand where you're coming from, but on the other hand, we cannot pretend that there are not ideological differences in both parties. You know, one party is obviously a party of the plutocrats. That is the one percenters. That is demonstrated by the 47% people's kind of statement that Romney made, who are takers. We know that in terms of ideology, who is more outspoken about protecting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Let's don't pretend that doesn't exist. That simply doesn't mean that everything is right with the Democrats, but it certainly lets us see we're very, very clear where the other side stands in terms of where their primary interest is, and that's in supporting the trickle-down economics. It's something that I think, if I can paraphrase the former Harvard Keynesian liberal economist, Kenneth Galbraith, he called it something like, and I'm paraphrasing, the elephant and the sparrow theory, trickle-down theory. That is, you know, the elephant gets all of the benefits that go with no tax increases, with all the benefits that does not close the loopholes. They deduct these benefits, and then they allow the benefits to pass through the alimentary canal, and they defecate, and the sparrow gets to eat what's left, and that's the 47%ers that are takers. And that's a good metaphor for me about which side is on one side, and that is the 1%ers, and which side is more likely to support the 99%. I don't want to pretend that that's not real. For me, that's real.
I applaud your question, and I also would encourage you, as you're going through, I guess, your studies, to know that you can still support the president, but you can also turn a critical eye to the policies that are coming out. I think you owe that to yourself and to the other people who are looking up to you. Is you can say, yes, I support the president, but I have a responsibility to look at the details of some of the things that he's saying. And we may agree on some points, but we may not agree on all points. And that's healthy discourse for you. So don't feel that we're beating up on him. And you're not beating up on him. If you look at his policies and say, well, I support what he's doing on this end, but I may not completely agree on the other end. That's fine to do. Don't just march in arms because I'm a friend or I'm a supporter, that I'm not going to question everything critically. Please question everything critically and still support him if you're a supporter.
Agree, and I think I'm optimistic on this. I think it's going to do more in the second term, and I expect a lot more by the executive order. But in addition, there is also the problem of squatting at the fence. I think the bigger issue is for all the progressive forces to make use of the opening that has been done by his election. Take advantage of that opening following his election to promote all kinds of agendas. And I just earlier on talked about a coalition that ready to get him elected. That coalition should stay active and push more progressive agenda.
Thank you. We're gonna have Gabriel. Did you want to offer? I think you were getting ready to offer one more observation, and then we'll get to our.
I was just really stuck on the notion that the president is commander-in-chief of the Navy and the military, and like Dr. Perry said, that all he can really do is go give a speech and hope that the legislative body will push through the legislation to change those things. And I didn't feel that it was fair to say that all the problems that we face in our country are his fault. Because what can he do about those things? He needs cooperation with the other branches in the government.
That's a valid point, and I don't undervalue the significance of the president and the significance of those speeches with the State of the Union addresses and things of that nature. He does set the tone. But you're right, and we didn't get to the question of the divides in Congress and the inability for people to work together. And it's not all on his shoulders, and we do have to start looking at the Congress and say, why aren't you guys working together? And not only looking at the president for accountability, but also holding Congress accountable, the same way I guess that we're looking at him.
It's not only just the divide in Congress, there is also the divide in the military, where he is the head of command. The military has got a section called the Crusaders, another section called the Rocks. Some members of the Crusaders don't think he's fit to be the president, and on more than one occasion, actually, some people in the military have refused or said openly that they will not take his orders. So there are those constraints, and some members of his administration also make the issue complicated. Some members have connections to certain sections of the military, others, so it is complicated, not just in Congress, but even in the military or command-in-chief.
One last thing I'll add is that we, as those of us who do choose to vote and participate in American democracy, we vote our congressmen and women in despite the low approval rating, as Brother Brown was saying. I mean, that they have a 10, 15, 20% approval rating, and yet we still elect these individuals over and over again, largely based on name recognition, but we're not really asking what essentially, what have they done for me lately? We're not asking that question. It's important to ask, and it's important to ask that question with your vote. So I would encourage you, even if you are disaffected or don't like a particular candidate, at some point during your time when you have an opportunity to cast a vote, you should still cast a vote for someone. You can write your name in there yourself, because the opportunity to cast a vote, period, you can write in Mickey Mouse, it doesn't matter. But the opportunity to do that is something that was blood and tears, and people died for that opportunity, and I would encourage you to use it. Again, if you don't find the candidate for you, make yourself that candidate. You perfectly have that opportunity, that ability, and I encourage us to think about Congress, though, as all the panelists were saying, because they are truly the ones that really can solve a lot of these problems with this stroke within. A lot of things that Dr. Barak was saying, really could be solved if we had a Congress that was willing to take them up. And we did in the late 60s, and then we almost got, a lot of poverty issues solved. We were so very close. And then, some historians have argued that because of the way the Vietnam War kind of progressed, those issues were brushed to the side and it never happened again. It was a missed opportunity. In order to create those opportunities again, the country relies on people like you to stand up, make your voice heard, participate in American democracy, and let your congressmen and women and all your elected officials know what your thoughts are about particular issues.
Thank you, panel, and thank you, Gabriel, and congratulations as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Alan J Raupp-Laverty, and my question to you is this. When Obama was elected for his first term, there came a few people who would say, well, now that we have our first African-American president, racism, as we know, is over. Clearly, this isn't the case. The second time it came back, and a few people have said the same thing. Obviously, since this hasn't happened, my question is, will there ever be a point where racism could entirely disappear? And what would the requirements be for that?
It's a wonderful last question with 4 minutes to go.
That question is asked, that's one of those questions that you ask that whoever invented the cure for cancer would be the greatest individual in this world. Racism, an article in yesterday's USA Today, racism just will not leave this country. It's here, well, not just this country, go to other parts of the world, racism is a problem. It's just an embedded mindset of so many people, and it's continuously being taught to others. So as long as something's being taught, I just don't see it being eradicated because of the ignorance, first and foremost, and you just have people that, for whatever reason, think that they're better than another group of people. I tell people in the minute, no one is no better than me, regardless of their race. I can only be my own worst enemy, and no one else is to be able to judge me based on looking at me and seeing I'm a black male. That is a height of ignorance. And to think that you still have power over someone in 2013 is just the most ridiculous notion that someone can have as a human being. And not, we don't want to get into, it's a very broad question and topic that in and of itself is a panel discussion. But part of the problem with racism in America, particularly here in Michigan, no one is willing to be honest enough to address it. We should be able to get into a room, and if you are of a different race, tell me to my face why you don't like me. And I just don't want to hear you say because of my skin, because that's not a reason or rationale. You need to give me a concrete rationale as to why you don't like someone of another race, gender, based on even someone's sexuality. You have to have something concrete. If you don't have anything concrete, then the ignorance manifestation of your thought process is just that, ignorance.
Thank you.
I simply just wanted to define what racism is, at least from my point of view. Racism is the idea and the concept that that a particular group of people or an individual has the power through decisions and policies to subjugate the rights and privileges of another individual or group. And so there's a difference between racism and prejudice and white supremacy. And often what particularly the American media calls as racism actually is not racism, it's prejudice. In order to be racist, you have to have the power to inflict harm and subjugation on a particular group of people. A lot of us don't have that power. We might not like someone else, might not like another group of people. That's not racism. It becomes racism when another group is limited in their same ability as another group is because of the power that one group has over them allows that manifestation to occur. So I think it's important for us to understand the difference between racism, white supremacy, prejudice, hatred, and just ill feelings toward other people.
Well, let me jump into this discussion by saying this. First of all, I think there's a lot of hope in the new young generation of people like yourself. I've seen a big difference between some of the kind of attitudes that I see displayed by many of the youth I've had the opportunity to teach than I have the baby boomers. Having said that, we're not in a post-racial era. And I don't think until we can have open dialogue, conversation, face up honestly to our history, take our proverbial head out of the sand, and do what's extremely hard for not only whites but blacks to do. Have really honest, open, non-threatening conversations and engage with each other. I think we got a long way to go. This is the browning of America. We're going to live in a country by 2050 that's going to be over 50% brown people, and probably by the end of the next century, white people may be a very clear minority.
Congratulations on winning the essay competition. And I'd like to echo that a part of the process starts in education, conversation, and tolerance. I referenced the March on Wall Street earlier. I think that deserves more attention. I think racism and classism are very important issues that are marching beside each other, and we're not giving them the attention that they deserve. But one of the things that has encouraged me as in a lot of my college classes, when we have this discussion, the willingness of students of all different races to contribute with very different viewpoints, but begin to learn to respect what their colleagues have to say. And also possibly it will influence some of the things that they feel are fake. I spoke about the University of Mississippi earlier with the riots after the election of President Obama. That was disheartening. But there were other students on campus who were there to support. And there were other students across the state who denounced that behavior. So there is hope, but it has to come through education and dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Patrick, are you in line?
I tried not to. I wanted to hold up from saying anything. But when I looked at the whole discussion tonight and the topic, given the fact that my son gave up 18 months of his own professional career to run Obama's election, and in an academic institution, we're going to sit either attempting to analyze, to criticize, or evaluate without really looking at, for me, when I talk to my son, his involvement was not so much that Obama was going to change the world overnight. But his involvement was the hope that by engaging people to begin to talk about issues that they've never been able to talk about and to look at the future might be a best way to start. Unfortunately, everybody becomes so attached to Joe's whatever on 6:09 in the morning or Fox News, that all our ideas really come from that. But my hope and prayer is that the academic institutions must engage other people to begin to get the young people to understand change is only going to come by having the masses to really put on the pressure. And then if you go back and you look at the Move On America, the Obama election campaign stuff, and what they are trying to do, to use that as an instrument in allowing people to become active participants in local politics, that really will help to shape and at least define future politics in this country. But if we're going to look at it from the same way we've been doing it, then I'm sorry, we're going to have the same problem, and we're going to evaluate him when I say it was not good. But let's listen to what he said. He's not criticizing, he's raising issues that we need to talk about and look at the future. Thank you.